Fact Romance 5 by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett. When my mother was a girl, the house where she and her parents lived was in a gloomy wood, out of the way from any village or thick settlement. One morning in August, my grandfather had some business a number of miles from home, and putting a saddle on his favorite horse, Dandy, a creature he loved next to his wife and children, he rode away to attend to it. When nightfall came and my grandfather did not return, my grandmother began to feel a little uneasy. As the night advanced, she and her daughter sitting up impatient for the return of the absent husband and father, a terrible storm gathered, in the middle of which their ears joyed to hear the well-known clatter of Dandy's hoofs. My grandmother sprung to the door, but upon opening it, she almost fainted in my mother's arms. For there stood Dandy, saddled and bridled, but no signs of my grandfather. My mother stepped out and found that the bridle was broken and the saddle soaked with rain and covered with mud. Sick at heart, they returned to the house. It was now after midnight, and the storm had quite passed over. Then, in the stillness of their dreary watching, they heard something in the next room, the spare room, which redoubled their terror. They heard the slow, heavy footfall of a man walking. Tramp, 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 it went. 3 times solemnly and deliberately, and then all was hushed again. By any who, in the middle of the night, have had the chill of a vague unknown horror creep into their very souls, it can well be imagined how they passed the time now. My mother sprang to the door and turned the key, and spoke what words of cheer she could force through her lips to the ears of her terrified parent. The dark hours crept slowly on, and at last a little tinge of daylight was seen through the eastern windows. Almost simultaneously with it, a bluff voice was heard some distance off, and the plash of a horse galloping along the soft, wet road. That bluff hello came to the pallid and exhausted females like a cheer from a passing ship to starving mariners on a wreck at sea. My grandmother opened the door this time to behold the red, laughing face of her husband, and to hear him tell how, after the storm was over, and he went to look for Dandy, whom he had fastened under a shed, he discovered that the skittish creature had broken his bridle and run away home, and how he could not get another horse for love or money at that hour of the night, and how he was fain forced to stop until nearly daylight. Then told my grandmother her story, her terror and her fears, and how she had heard heavy footfalls in the parlor, whereat my grandfather laughed and walked to the door between the rooms and unlocked it, and saw nothing but darkness, for the shutters were closed. My mother and grandmother followed timidly, though they now began to fear the discovery of some comical reason for their alarm. My grandfather threw open the shutters, and then they all swept their sight round the room, after which such a guffaw of laughter came from the husband's capacious mouth that Dandy, away up in the barnyard, sent back an answering neigh in recognition. 3 or 4 days previously, my mother had broken off from a peach tree in the garden a branch uncommonly full of fruit of a remarkable size and beauty. She brought it in and placed it amid the flowers and other simple ornaments on the high shelf over the parlor fireplace. The night before, while the mother and daughter were watching, 3 of the peaches, overripe, had dropped, one after another, on the floor, and my mother's and grandmother's terrified imaginations had converted the harmless fruit into human heels. There, then, was the mystery, and there lay the beautiful peaches, which my grandfather laughed at so convulsively that my provoked grandame, after laughing a while too, picked them up and half jokingly, half seriously, thrust them so far into the open jaws of her husband that he was nigh to have been choked in good earnest. That was Fact Romance 5 by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett.